This is the brand new for 2025 Hiby R3 Pro Mark II. And this is an iPod from literally 20 years ago. Which one is the best digital audio player in 2025? Well, hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and the answer to that question is, frankly, neither of them are. Personally, I still prefer to have Android-based digital audio players, but there's a number of people out there that still prefer not to have Android-based audio players, and fair enough. So Hiby, every 6 months or so, makes a new one of these, and this is the latest one, the R3 Pro Mark II. It comes in at $200, and its headline features are that it now has 4 op amps in it. And I don't know, I guess I kind of have the feeling that Hiby's not really moving these things on where I feel like they need to be moved on the most, which is in the user experience, which is why I've pulled out the iPod to compare. And is it really possible that this 20-year-old iPod, literally 20 years old, is a better digital audio player in 2025? Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with, listening to, and experiencing this R3 Pro II, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we get into that, I guess a quick shout out to Hiby for sending in this player for review. If you want to check out the R3 Pro II, I'll have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box of the R3 Pro II, talk about the physical form factor, build quality, and all that stuff. And then we'll get into talking about the functionality of this player and where, in some ways, it definitely loses to the iPod still 20 years later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So here you go. Here is the packaging. Nice small box. I like to see it. And what you get inside is what you should probably expect from a digital audio player. Not a ton, but it's everything that you need. Let me move the player to the side, and this little ear tip, that's my my stand for the day. But what you get inside is you get, of course, a USB-C charging cable. It's got USB-A on one end, so you can plug that into a computer, USB-C on the other end, so you can plug that into the DAP. And this is kind of like set up for you to plug it into a computer and charge it that way. Just one thing to note is that a lot of these, I don't want to say these Hiby players, but a lot of just small electronics like this that come with this type of a charging cable, they actually want you to plug it into a PC to charge rather than plugging it into a high-speed charger. From what I can tell, the R3 Pro actually supports high-speed charging, so you don't need to. In fact, that's pretty much all I charged it up. But anyway, apart from that, you also do get a little lanyard, and you might notice that my player is a similar bluish green color, and I think that this is just going to match whatever color player you get, which I think is a kind of a cool little touch. Apart from that, you also do get a screen protector. And in fact, there was a screen protector pre-installed on this player when I got it, but it is just the thin plastic type of screen protector, which I'm not a big fan of. I just don't think that, I like to touch glass. And well, these things, they're just not as nice to touch as a glass screen, so I take them off and I risk scratching my screens, but frankly, it's never been a problem for me. But if it is for you, at least it comes with one screen protector pre-installed and another one in the box. Talking about protection, you also do get a case, and this is actually an interesting one. So this is not the first Hiby player that comes with a silicone case like this, but this is the first one that I can poke my finger entirely through because it doesn't have a back on it. And we'll highlight for you in a little bit exactly why, but kind of think of this more like an iPhone 4 bumper, if any of you all are old enough to remember that. Not quite as old as this iPod that I showed you, but yeah, it does have cutouts for all the buttons, which I actually like to see. It makes it just easier to feel the buttons. There's no like ambiguity with it. I hate cases that cover up the buttons so that you're then operating through some silicone. So this is nice. It also has cutouts for down here, of course, the headphone jacks and the USB-C charging. The one thing it doesn't have, make sure I'm not lying. No, I think this is accurate. It doesn't have a cutout for the micro SD card slot. So if you want to swap the micro SD card or take it out or put any new music on it, whatever, you're gonna have to take the case off. And it is kind of difficult to put it on, which it should be difficult to put it on and off because you don't want it falling off, but then it makes it hard to access the micro SD card slot. But anyway, it's a nice little case, but I think that this device feels so nice in the hand without that. I can't bring myself to put this case on it. And that will bring us into talking about the build quality on the player itself. And I'm just gonna start by talking about the materials in this thing, which are quite nice. You can see that it's got this cool color. I really dig this. It's like I don't even call this like a turquoise. Interestingly, on their website, they describe this as a green, but I think it is definitely much more of a bluish green and maybe more heavily on the blue than on the green. But yeah, turquoise is kind of what to expect. If you see it in their website pictures, their pictures are accurate, but they describe it as green, which I think is not quite accurate. But yeah, the materials on it are quite nice. Not just the color. This is, you know, in typical Hiby fashion, the build quality is fantastic. This is an aluminum rail all the way around. You've got a nice large glass screen. Well, large-ish for given how big the player is. I think it's like a 3.2 inch screen. Let me just check my notes to make sure. And well, on the back, oh, 3.3 inches. I undersold it. On the back here is the other kind of headline difference of this player, and this is why the back is cut out on the case, is because it has this actually nice soft, they call it ultra suede material. Apparently it's a branded material that I'm not familiar with, but it is quite nice. It reminds me a lot of Alcantara. If you've used Alcantara or felt Alcantara in the past, it's kind of like a suede, but I think it's a synthetic, so it's not actually made out of a baby cow or anything like that. And it feels really nice. I like it for a couple of reasons. One, just because it's nice to feel in the hand, but I also really like a soft touch back, because when I place a player like this onto, let's say, a desktop, like a hard surface, I like that to be a soft landing. In fact, on my favorite audio players, the players that I will daily drive, usually I will add a piece of leather to the back of it. Yes, actually, baby cow, I apologize. But I just like having that soft touch. And then also that for that reason, it won't like slide off a couch. It's just a much nicer material to have on the back of a player than glass. Even though glass is premium feeling, I think that this is also premium and just a lot more functional. Maybe the only downside of something like this, material like this, is that I could see it getting maybe gunked up and dirty because it is like a fabric. Again, it is, I'm pretty sure, a synthetic fabric, so hopefully you can clean it, but you know, just take care of it. Apart from that material, anything else to say about the physical form factor on this thing? I mean, I was going to talk a little bit about the screen, but before I talk about the screen, I actually just kind of want to talk about the dimensions on this player, which might not have stood out to you because they didn't stand out to me in pictures, even though I had seen pictures on it. It didn't really stand out to me until I got this thing in hand. So let me pull in the last Hiby R3 that I reviewed for comparison. And is there a difference there that stands out? It's like this guy is chunky, and in a way that I actually really like. I mean, I like the way that this thing feels. This is the R3 Mark II, I believe. This is the R3 Pro Mark II. But yeah, there is something just kind of nice and satisfying about the feel of this little player in my hand. They call it, what do they call it like a pocket cannon or something like that, which feels like an appropriate description because it's just a little solid nugget. And it's also surprisingly powerful, which we will talk about in a bit. Okay, apart from that, I mentioned I was going to talk about the screen. And well, it is, you know, it's kind of like all the other screens that these players come with. It is reasonably high resolution. It looks fairly nice, LCD screen. But this one has an issue that I haven't had on their other players, and I don't know how much of it is this particular unit versus is there something with the software, I don't know, but basically the white balance is just not right at all. So I'm going to pull up this picture as a comparison here, and then over here we'll have the other Hiby R3, and you can see I think this is an accurate white balance, maybe a little bit on the warm side, but this is pretty accurate. Over here, I would say this is pretty accurate, maybe a little bit on the cool side, a little bit more yellows in the white balance, but the white balance that we have here on the R3 Pro II, at least my unit again, is just way green. Let me tilt it up here so you can kind of see, but it's just like way yellow and way green. And it's not just because of the UI shade that I have on here, because you can actually customize the UI, and I did match it to the color of the player. In fact, I picked this color of the UI. You can see down here I've got a green play button and bluish green there. I actually picked this because it leaned into the color tint of the screen, and it made it look a little bit less janky. But without it, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely not the best white balance on the screen, and it's to the point that it was actually a little bit distracting and annoying. So I did something about it as much as I could. Okay, that's enough talk about the physical form factor. Apart from, well, of course, the buttons and the input and output. So let's talk about the buttons over here on. Let's start with the left side. Of course, we've got our volume controls, volume rocker, up and down, which means we don't have a volume knob. Over here on the last R3 that I reviewed, we did have a volume knob, and some people definitely prefer to have a knob. I like a knob, but I'm kind of two opinions about it when it comes to portable players, because when you put something in your pocket that has a knob, there's just a very good chance you're gonna bump it and accidentally change the volume control. Whereas something like this, I think, is actually more optimal for pocket use. It's just maybe a little bit less audiophile. So there you go. And then over here on the other side, you have your full media playback. You've got your screen on and off, which I'll press to demonstrate. And then you've got your track previous and next, and you've got your play pause button. One notable thing here is that Hiby is continuing this kind of strange UI pattern that is nonetheless, it's something you'll get used to, so I don't think it's a big deal, but they have this rocker, which you almost imagine that previous and next track would be on the rocker, but it's actually the play pause button is on the top of the rocker and the next track button is on the bottom of it, which again, a bit of a strange thing. Maybe Hiby sees this as kind of like their design language, but nonetheless, something you will have to get used to, and I swear you will. You will get used to it. Okay, anything else to talk about? Okay, actually one other thing I wanted to just mention real briefly on the buttons is that while the build quality in this thing is generally fantastic, and Hiby stuff usually is, this one does have a little bit of a rattle. And I kind of noticed it just when handling it, not like, I don't go out of my way and shake things, but just using the device, I noticed it. And I actually think partly it's the buttons. That's way too close of a shot. You didn't need to see that. It's partly the buttons, but I actually pinpointed it to this little lanyard mechanism there, which seems a little bit on the loose side. So I don't know if you're bothered about that sort of thing, there you go. And that will lead us into talking about the I/O, of course. Now, down here on the bottom of the player is where you have your USB-C charging port, as mentioned, and you've got standard 4.4mm balanced output as well as a 3.5mm single-ended output. So you've got both of those things covered. Personally, I'm a big fan of the 3.5, but I know a lot of people out there like that 4.4, so you're well served here. The other thing to talk about is the micro SD card slot, which I mentioned previously because it is covered by this case, right? So when you put this case on, the micro SD card slot ends up getting covered by it. But the bigger issue for me is actually not that it gets, actually, hold on, maybe it doesn't get covered. Maybe I had this thing upside down. Okay, it doesn't get covered. I take it all back. I figured it out. But the other thing that does kind of bother me about this thing is that, well, it's behind a silicone door, and maybe I just cut my fingernails a little bit too short. Like this is, I'm in need of a fingernail trim. Like this starts to feel bad for me. But because I guess I cut my fingernails pretty short, this is actually really hard to get open and kind of a pain in the butt. So while I take back my previous complaint about access to the memory card SD slot, that one I retain because, again, I didn't really use the case. Okay, anything else to talk about this thing in terms of physical form factor? I don't think so, but I did want to, because we're talking about this thing versus an iPod, just do a brief comparison versus, again, a 20-year-old iPod. Now, in terms of build quality materials, this thing feels, frankly, pretty fantastic. It's got an all-metal back, but as you might notice, this thing is scratched to hell. And that's not just because it's 20 years old. These things just scratched up really, really easily. Apart from that, though, it feels awesome in the hand. And, well, I guess maybe the biggest downsides are going to be actually the button layout, in that there's just not enough buttons really on this thing. In fact, there's not even like a dedicated screen on-off button like you might expect. Remember, this thing's 20 years old. It's literally was made before smartphones were normal, right? This is made before the iPhone. But apart from that, that's not the only thing that's missing. There's also no dedicated volume buttons, which means that here's how you adjust the volume, right? Is you spin this dial. But if you're on a screen where you need to use this dial to navigate the list, you can't adjust volume, which is a bit of a bummer. So I do think that that is actually legitimately one of the biggest UI downsides of this player. As a dedicated audio player in 2025, would that be enough to like make me want to go to this? Definitely be a reason I would want a player that wasn't the iPod, but I don't know. We'll talk about the rest of the UI in a little bit. Okay, anything else to talk about? I don't think so. So we're gonna move on to basically talking about the functionality. And I'm gonna start by just kind of talking about the system that we have here. And this is where, frankly, I think that there's a lot of stagnancy, is that the word? On the part of Hiby. So it's using standard Hiby OS. Like I mentioned, this is not an Android-based player. That doesn't get you any closer to it, but I'll give you a little bit of a tour here. The processor, they say, is an updated processor. It looks like they've been using the same processor in the past couple of R3s, but it is newer than the one in like this player that I showed you a little bit ago. But as far as like what that means for the UI and the experience of it, I don't know that it means that much. But before I guess we get into that, just a quick overview of some of the features that it has, because it does have some actually pretty useful stuff. So some stuff that you might not find on an iPod, for example. It does have Tidal and Qobuz support. I don't subscribe to these services, so I don't exactly know how this functions, but There you go. Again, it's not Android, so it doesn't have the full apps, but it does have some sort of support for those things. The other things that it has, which is pretty cool, is it does have Wi-Fi, so you can connect this to the network and download over-the-air system updates, which is pretty cool, as well as Bluetooth functionality, which lets you do a couple of things. Not only can you connect a Bluetooth headphone to this. If you wanted to listen to your Sony XM6, for example, you could totally do that. But you can also use this as a Bluetooth receiver. So if you wanted to connect your phone, play, let's say Spotify, for example, on your phone, connect it to this, then you can use the audio hardware on this to connect to your headphones and listen to your headphones that way. So it can work as kind of both a receiver and a transmitter, which is pretty cool. It does also have a USB DAC functionality. So you can kind of use this as like an all-in-one audio hub, I suppose, depending on where you are in your life. If you're at your desktop, if you're on the go, or if you want a standalone player. So that's pretty cool. The iPod definitely doesn't have that kind of support. Now, the UI itself is where I do want to complain about, though. Because there's just some jank in this thing, man. And a couple of things that they haven't really addressed. So like one thing just is like a high level. I'm tapping the wrong thing there by accident, but we'll skip that for now. They split settings into two different areas, right? So there's like settings at the top level, and then if you navigate into the music section, then you have a separate settings cog, which has a completely different set of settings. A little bit unintuitive. I would say very unintuitive. If there's a setting that you're looking for in this device, and it's possible that it's just in a place that you're not looking for it, you'll get used to that, of course. The bigger problems for me more are down to the way that just the performance of this player. And again, like I said, that this has an updated chipset on it, but I don't really think that the processor speed is the thing that's holding this thing back, because again, this iPod is 20 years old. I'm sure the processor in this thing is way worse than the processor in this thing, but nonetheless, this thing is jankier to use. So just to kind of highlight this for you, like this is what the scrolling looks like. It's a little bit on the slow side. You can see the screen refresh is a bit bad. Some of the other issues I have is just with the touch responsiveness. Like sometimes it will detect touches when I didn't expect it to, and sometimes it won't detect touches. Sometimes the UI will lock up. So it has this UI down here, which lets you quickly scroll a big list of artists, which I appreciate. But when I let go, the letter stays on screen. And while that's there, I can't tap anything else, right? I don't know if you saw that, if you caught that, but basically, I tried to tap and it didn't register the tap until that letter times out, goes away, and then I can tap the screen. It just means I am trying to use the UI a little bit faster than I can, and sometimes because it doesn't work the way I expect, I end up doing mistaps and just doing the wrong thing. So that's kind of annoying. Kind of a similar type of issue, not the exact type, but pretty similar, is like when I have this volume control up, the rest of the screen down below doesn't work. And to highlight this, I'll just play this track so you can see, all right, let's go to here. You can see that the timer is moving, right? It's advancing because the track is playing. But if I'm adjusting the volume, you might notice that the timer stops, not because the audio stops, but just because the UI underneath the volume control no longer is updating. And I'm gonna stop adjusting the volume, and you'll see that the timer will eventually catch up once that goes out. The other thing that's notable is that while that volume control is up there, if I try to use parts of the UI, it just doesn't work. And you have to wait for that thing to time out before you can go back to using the UI. And it's just little things like that kind of add up to making this somewhat of a frustrating user experience. Now, this is not new to this player. Again, like I mentioned, Hiby kind of makes like a new version of this every 6 months or so. It's just, and I've complained about it to some degree in my other reviews as well, but it's, you know, a bit of a trade-off that you get for a little player like this that's not running Android. Why I'm making maybe slightly bigger of a deal of it now is just that it's not getting better. And I feel like it can get better. And I would love to see it get better because, again, going back to this 20-year-old iPod, the UI on this is so much more usable. I much prefer using the UI on this thing. Like scrolling big lists, very fast, very easy. I don't have any issues with the UI, you know, getting frozen and locking me out of certain inputs. Again, some of it is laid out a little bit weird. I would love to have dedicated volume controls. But apart from that, like this thing's just like so much better to use than this player 20 years later. It is a little bit of a bummer. I guess the other thing, if I'm being fair, why this isn't still kind of not the best pick in 2025 is it does still require using Apple Music app. Like I can't just drag and drop files onto it unless I modify the firmware, in which case, well, then you just get another worse UI. It also won't play FLAC files, again, unless I modify the firmware. But I don't know, those are kind of disqualifying features for me, to be honest. So like, I'm not proposing that I would use this instead, but I am saying that there's definitely parts of this player, the iPod, that are so much better to use than this 20-year newer player here. But that will move us into talking about the rest of the functionality here on the R3 Pro II. I did want to highlight some EQ functions, which are pretty nice to see. Okay, the EQ functions on the iPod are terrible. It's got preset like pop jazz filters, which is the worst kind of EQ. Over here on the Hiby, we've got actually some decent EQ options, although we've got some issues with this as well. Let me go into, let me see if I can find the right setting screen. It's going to be one on the music. You've got two options. You've got MSEB, which is their Mage Sound 8-ball, I believe is what it's called. It's actually a pretty cool UI for adjusting and customizing the sound. It's kind of like a parametric EQ, but rather than you inputting the values and kind of like making it up, they've kind of predefined these different audiophile terms and allow you to modify the sound that way, which is cool. The other thing is that they also do have a graphic equalizer. Let's see if I can tap this thing correctly. A graphic equalizer with 10 bands so that you can, oh, I got to turn it on before it'll let me touch it. You can adjust, you know, the different bands and customize the sound the way you want there. The one issue I have with this is this actually doesn't seem to function right now. I'm not sure why. I reached out to Hiby about it. I didn't hear back in time for this review. So hopefully this is something that they will address with the firmware update. Again, there are over-the-air updates on it. So I trust they will fix this. But at this point, the 10-band graphic EQ does not actually function. Doesn't do anything. At least not with the tracks I was using. Okay. Anything else to talk about? Actually, there's one other issue I wanted to mention on the UI of this that I forgot to mention, is that there seems to be some issue with the indexing of music. So if I go to, it's basically just, it's missing some tracks, which is weird. And I've also had some issues with it. There were tracks that it did index where I went to go play them and it told me the files were missing. And then I rescanned the card and then it worked. But there's also an example here I can show you with My Favorite Men I Trust. Go to Headroom. And if you know anything about this album like I do, you know that Break for Lovers is actually the second track on this album. But there's no track before that because, I don't know, it's just gone. I've rescanned this memory card a couple of times and it will not find track number 1. The same thing happened with another album. I rescanned the card. That time, track number 1 did come back. So I don't know. It seems like there's a couple of bugs and issues with this. It did just come out recently. So again, I do trust that Hiby will update this because they are actually good about doing firmware updates, but nonetheless, kind of annoying. Anyway, okay. Now let's get into the rest of the functionality in this player. I'm going to talk about battery life on this thing, which is another thing that they make fairly big deal about with this updated R3 Pro II. Whereas a player like this one had a 2000 milliamp hour battery and got about 15 hours of battery life, well, this one's got twice the battery size. It's got 4000 milliamp hours, but it doesn't have quite twice the battery life. It's about 21 hours is what they claim. And I would say that's actually pretty accurate. When I was doing some testing, it was about, I was dropping about 5% battery for every hour that I played, which adds up to about 20 plus hours of battery life, which is actually pretty good. It's not bad. I'm not going to complain about that. Although it would be nice if you got double the battery life and, you know, this extra thick boy to have an audio player with 40 hours of battery. That would be kind of nice. But alas, we don't get that because I don't know. I think battery life has just not really been the priority for not just Hiby, for pretty much all of the digital audio player game. They're all kind of satisfied with like 15 hours of battery life. And maybe that's where customers are. That's where customers just, I need 10, 15 hours battery life and I'm fine. I won't complain. Now I just want more power. And that's kind of what they keep doing is that this thing has 2 DACs in it, but also 4 op amps, like I talked about up top. And my suspicion is that especially having those 4 op amps is contributing to the battery life on this thing being good, but probably not as good as it could be if it had more modest audio output. Okay, so I guess that's going to bring us into talking about the sound here on the R3 Pro II. And you know, I don't talk a whole lot about how these things sound, apart from some things that I think are actually impactful and make a difference in my life. The hardware, okay, maybe I'm lying a little bit because this doesn't make that big of a difference to me, but if you're curious, it uses 2 DAC chips. They are Cirrus Logic CS43198 chips. Pretty common DAC chip you see in a lot of these players. Like I mentioned, it's got 4 op amps inside of it. In terms of power output, this is a thing that you can absolutely, it makes a difference in terms of how loud you can get your device or your headphones. On single-ended, it's 121 milliwatts of power, which is not like crazy power, but it's plenty of power. 121 milliwatts of power will get my Sennheiser HD600s to plenty loud. In fact, I got them plenty loud. I got them, my HD600s, here's the thing, folks. I'm looking for them. They're right over here. HD600, known for being a hard-to-drive headphone. On low gain, I believe this thing is using just 12.5 milliwatts of that 121 milliwatts of power. On low gain, these things get louder than I want them to get, okay? With 12 milliwatts of power. So why do we need 121 milliwatts of power? Well, okay, maybe you need some headroom, maybe your music's quiet, maybe you're using EQ, I don't know, but do you need much more than 121 milliwatts? If you do, well, you can use the balance connector, where it has a whopping 400 milliwatts of output power. And again, like maybe there's some utility in having that much power on these little players, but I think that's really pretty overkill. And personally, I would trade having even more battery life for having crazy output levels. Although, I don't know, 4,000 is not nuts. 400 milliwatts is not nuts, that's fine. And we are talking the milliwatts at 32 ohms, which is the pretty standard claim there. Okay, in terms of the other things that I usually look at are gonna be like output impedance. Is the output, is the headphone jack on this thing like shifting the frequency response of sensitive IMs? I didn't notice anything like that. I also couldn't see any claims on their website about what the output impedance is, but my suspicion is that it's below 1 ohm for the 3.5 mil, and that's kind of where I need it to be. Again, I use my Campfire Audio Aura as a test of like the sensitivity of this stuff, because its frequency response can be shifted by even not a whole lot of output impedance. The other thing that the Aura is really good at testing is noise floor, which this thing actually performs fantastic at. On either 3.5 mil or 4.4 mil, the noise floor is very, very well controlled on this player. You can tell maybe just a little bit that there is a noise floor. You can tell that the amp is engaged. Like I'm using my test track, which is intentionally playing silence so that if there is noise floor from the amplifier, I can hear it on my very sensitive auras. And I can just kind of barely tell that it's on. So I'd say this is an excellent performance. Versus this iPod, noise floor performance on this thing is actually terrible. The auras are kind of unlistenable on this iPod. For anyone who thinks that like there is no difference between any players, okay, I generally am kind of that guy, right? But this is an example where it's not 100% true. There are players that just don't have audio hardware up to snuff with what we expect. And unfortunately, the iPod, this is the 5th gen, is not up to snuff. The amplifier is very, very hissy, very noisy. On top of that, I also noticed that the frequency response of the Aura was all off. Like it's not a very bassy IM. It's a little bit on the warm tilted side just in terms of its mid-range, but not a bassy IM at all. But on this, it sounded a little bit brighter and just like completely devoid of bass. So it was not something I noticed when I was listening to the HD600, which by the way, you can power an HD600 perfectly fine off of an iPod. But so yeah, that tonal balance shift was not something I noticed in the HD600, but with the Aura, it very much was obvious. And so again, for me, while I do love the UI in this player, it is not the best audio player in 2025, unfortunately. Yeah, so I don't know, I guess that is probably as much as I can tell you about this Hiby R3 Pro Mark II. I think this is undoubtedly a very capable little audio player. And in a lot of ways, it is appreciably better than the old iPod from 20 years ago. But in terms of the UI and the user experience, I feel like it's really stagnant. And I would love to see Hiby move this on. Like let's start solving some of these bugs. Let's start getting a smoother, more responsive touch experience. I think we can do it. As is, I'm gonna give it 3 stars out of 5. Again, not a bad little player. In a lot of ways, this is probably one of their better players, non-Android based players. But I still think if you want the best audio player in 2025, the Android players are where it's at. But if you wanna check out this one, of course, I have it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
This review is super, yeah. Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.